The story begins with a bizarre chain of events that nobody could have predicted. When the U.S. Open Tennis Championship made global headlines for all the wrong reasons, because of a hat snatching incident that went viral overnight. Few imagined the chaos it would cause for a small, unrelated company that simply shared the same name as the person accused. The incident at the tournament was straightforward on the surface. During a heated match, a fan became disruptive, leaned too far into the viewing area, and in the midst of being escorted out by security, yanked the hat off another attendee. Cameras caught every angle. The footage was shared on sports channels, news websites, and social media platforms around the world. Within hours, millions had watched the bizarre altercation. Viewers, enraged by what they saw, began searching for the individual responsible. What they found instead was something completely different. A small local business that had no connection to the incident whatsoever, except for one unfortunate coincidence: the name. The company in question was a modest family-owned business that had worked hard for years to build a reputation. Its brand identity was tied closely to the owner's heritage, and its name was a tribute to a beloved family figure. It had nothing to do with tennis, the US Open, or the unfolding scandal. But in the world of online searching, people rarely stop to question context. As soon as angry viewers typed the name into Google, the company popped up. Within hours, its business pages, social media accounts, and online reviews were flooded with furious comments from people who believed they were attacking the right target. The reviews were brutal. One-star ratings poured in by the hundreds. Comments accused the company of supporting violence, being disrespectful, and even suggested boycotts. None of the reviewers had ever purchased a product or visited the store, but the digital mob had already made up its mind. The company's employees, confused and overwhelmed, logged in to see their hard-earned reputation being destroyed in real time. At first, they assumed it was some kind of glitch or prank. But soon it became clear they were the accidental victims of mistaken identity. The impact was devastating. Loyal customers who didn't know the full story began to hesitate, wondering if the business was tied to some controversial figure. Potential clients canceled orders, unwilling to associate themselves with a name suddenly trending for all the wrong reasons. The small business, which had survived economic downturns and local competition, now found itself under siege, not because of its own actions, but because of someone else's behavior at a sporting event thousands of miles away. The owner tried everything to fix the situation. Phone calls to review platforms went unanswered. Emails to customer service departments returned generic replies. Even attempts to explain on social media were drowned out by the angry mob, who accused the company of lying or trying to cover up its guilt. In today's world of online outrage, truth often takes a backseat to viral storytelling. The business's pleas that they had nothing to do with the US Open fell on deaf ears. What made the situation worse was the sheer speed at which misinformation spread. Influencers on TikTok and Instagram reposted the video of the hat snatcher while tagging the wrong company account. Satirical meme pages mocked the business, treating it as if it were connected to the scandal. Even local news outlets, desperate for clicks, ran poorly researched articles that mentioned the company name without clarifying that it was a different entity. By the time corrections were issued, the damage had already been done. For the small company, this was more than just a PR crisis. It was an existential threat. Online reviews play a huge role in customer trust, and having a flood of negative ratings can bury a business in search results. Overnight, the company's profile shifted from trusted local brand to controversial business linked to scandal. What should have been a time of steady growth and community recognition turned into a nightmare of constant explanations, refunds, and financial loss. The employees began to feel demoralized, as every interaction with customers now started with suspicion. And yet, despite the chaos, There was a lesson hidden in this storm. It revealed how fragile reputation has become in the digital era. It showed how quickly an innocent party can be dragged into scandal through no fault of their own. And it highlighted the unchecked power of viral outrage, where people act first and research later. For the company, the road back to stability would be long and uncertain. But one thing was clear: they were now unwilling participants in a story that started with a hat snatching incident at the U.S. Open and spiraled into a cautionary tale about the dangers of mistaken identity in the internet age. As the days went by, the nightmare only grew worse. What began as a flood of angry reviews quickly turned into targeted harassment. The company's official phone number, listed publicly for customer service, started receiving dozens of hostile calls every hour. Many were silent calls meant to waste time and disrupt business. Others included shouting, insults, and even threats. Employees found themselves frightened to answer the phone, never knowing if it would be a genuine customer or another stranger from across the country venting rage over an incident that had nothing to do with them. The once friendly atmosphere inside the small office had shifted into tension and dread. Social media, instead of helping to clear the air, became a battlefield. The business tried posting a carefully worded statement explaining that they were not associated with the U.S. Open, nor with the individual caught on camera during the hat snatching incident. They pointed out their history in the community, their record of customer service, and their dedication to their craft. But in the age of quick reactions, the post was barely noticed compared to the flood of memes and angry comments. Whenever supporters tried to defend the company, trolls responded with sarcasm or dismissive replies, determined to keep the controversy alive. The situation revealed a darker side of online culture. Many of those leaving reviews and comments had no real interest in justice. They were simply participating in a trend, enjoying the sense of belonging that came from attacking a common target. For them, it was entertainment, something to laugh about with friends or share on social media. But for the business, it was a direct attack on their livelihood, their reputation, and their dignity. The gap between perception and reality had never been so wide, and the company found itself crushed in between. Meanwhile, the actual culprit from the U.S. Open, the real hat snatcher, faded into the background. After a brief surge of media attention, he was quickly forgotten by the online crowd. The viral cycle had moved on, but the damage to the company lingered. It was as if the internet had decided that the company would serve as the permanent scapegoat, an easy symbol to represent the frustration people felt when they saw the video. Legal options were explored, but they proved complicated. Lawyers explained that review platforms were protected under existing laws, making it nearly impossible to demand the removal of false reviews. Social media companies offered little more than automated replies. Even when it was clear that harassment was based on mistaken identity, there was no fast way to undo the harm. The company was stuck in a maze of bureaucracy while their reputation crumbled in real time. Inside the office, morale hit an all-time low. Employees who once took pride in their work began questioning whether it was worth continuing. Some considered quitting, unable to handle the constant negativity. The owner, who had poured years of effort and personal sacrifice into building the brand, struggled with guilt. He felt responsible for something he could not control. Each morning began with dread, opening emails and notifications only to find more hostility. At times, it seemed like the very survival of the business was at risk. Yet in the middle of this storm, a small glimmer of support began to shine through. A few loyal customers, upset by the injustice, started speaking out on behalf of the company. They left detailed positive reviews, reminding people of their real experiences. Some even organized a local campaign, encouraging neighbors to shop at the business to help offset the damage. It wasn't enough to stop the flood of negativity, but it was a reminder that not everyone had turned against them. The incident also sparked broader conversations in the community about the dangers of online mob mentality. Local newspapers and radio hosts began covering the story, not the US Open scandal, but the case of mistaken identity that had wrecked an innocent business. This attention gave the company a chance to tell its side of the story. Interviews with the owner highlighted the absurdity of the situation, showing how easily misinformation could destroy years of hard work. Some readers and listeners, moved by the unfairness, began rallying to the company's side. Even so, repairing the damage would not be simple. Negative reviews still dominated search results. Social media remained hostile. The business's reputation had been stained, and trust once lost is never easily regained. But slowly, the narrative began to shift. What had started as blind outrage was now being reframed as a cautionary tale. The company had become a symbol of how dangerous it is to act without facts, and how quickly digital anger can spill over into real-world harm. For the employees, the support provided a flicker of hope, though it did not erase the scars. They still faced the daily grind of answering skeptical customers, monitoring online attacks, and trying to rebuild their credibility. But they also realized that their struggle was bigger than themselves. They were not just fighting to save their company. They were fighting to prove that truth and fairness still mattered in a world drowning in misinformation. Weeks passed, but the shadows of the review bombing lingered like an unshakable curse. Even as news outlets began clarifying that the company had no link to the US Open incident, the digital scars remained etched into their online presence. Search engines still displayed one-star reviews at the top, screenshots of angry comments continued circulating, and the company's name, once associated with quality and reliability, now carried a bitter taste of controversy. The psychological toll on the staff became increasingly visible. One employee, who had been with the company since its early days, confessed that she no longer felt proud to tell people where she worked. "It feels like everyone thinks we're guilty of something," she admitted in a quiet moment. Others struggled with anxiety, dreading each new shift. The business had once been a place of camaraderie and laughter, but now silence often filled the air, broken only by the sound of phones ringing with yet another angry caller, or the dull tapping of keyboards as employees fought to keep up with damage control. The owner realized that mere denial was not enough. If the company was to survive, it needed a bold strategy, not just to defend itself, but to reclaim control of the narrative. A crisis communications consultant was brought in, someone experienced in handling reputational disasters. The consultant's advice was straightforward but daunting: transparency, persistence, and counteraction. The company would need to tell its story louder than the mob, show its humanity, and flood the internet with positive truth until the lies were drowned out. This meant leaning into media appearances, writing op-eds, engaging directly with journalists, and even producing videos where employees spoke about their experiences. The consultant encouraged them to highlight not only the injustice, but also the human impact. The sleepless nights, the financial strain, the fear of closing their doors forever. By showing real faces and voices behind the brand, the company could transform from a faceless target into sympathetic individuals wronged by circumstance. At first, the idea of speaking publicly terrified the employees. They worried about inviting more hostility. But when the owner delivered a heartfelt speech, reminding them of why they had built the company in the first place, and how silence had only allowed lies to spread, they reluctantly agreed. A series of videos were filmed, raw and unscripted, featuring employees telling their side of the story. One video showed a young worker breaking into tears as she described being insulted by strangers on the phone. Another highlighted the business's long history of serving the local community. These clips were uploaded across platforms, not as slick marketing, but as desperate pleas for fairness. The response was mixed. Trolls continued mocking them, dismissing their pain as damage control. But for every cruel remark, there was also a voice of empathy. Strangers began leaving supportive comments, encouraging others to see the truth. Slowly, hashtags supporting the company emerged, started by people who felt outraged that innocent lives were being ruined by online ignorance. Local influencers, seeing an opportunity to rally against digital bullying, amplified the message. For the first time since the scandal began, the company saw glimpses of hope cutting through the storm. Meanwhile, the financial struggle was very real. Sales had plummeted, and the company faced the possibility of layoffs. To counter this, the owner introduced discounts and loyalty campaigns, urging locals to shop in store to keep the business alive. Customers who knew the truth showed up, sometimes buying more than they needed, simply to offer support. A few even slipped encouraging notes into their payment envelopes, thanking the company for standing strong. Though revenue was far from what it had once been, these small acts of kindness carried immense emotional weight. Behind the scenes, the consultant pushed for one more move: legal pressure. While review platforms could not be forced to delete most comments, cases involving targeted harassment and false information could sometimes be challenged. Lawyers began filing complaints, gathering evidence of deliberate attacks. It was slow and exhausting, but the act of fighting back gave the staff a renewed sense of agency. They were no longer sitting helplessly while the world mocked them. They were pushing back step by step. Through this process, the company discovered something unexpected. Their struggle began resonating with other small businesses that had suffered similar fates. Restaurants, shops, and startups unfairly targeted by mobs or confused with controversial figures. Emails poured in from owners who shared their own horror stories of digital injustice. The company realized they were not alone. What had happened to them was not an isolated case, but part of a growing problem in the modern era. This sparked an idea: perhaps they could transform their tragedy into advocacy, raising awareness of how fragile reputations had become in a world ruled by reviews and algorithms. As they considered this broader mission, the immediate crisis was still far from over. Every day brought new challenges: refunds demanded by confused customers, false claims circulating online, and the lingering threat of financial collapse. Yet the business was no longer merely surviving in silence. It had begun fighting with its voice, its story, and its resilience. The scars of the attack would remain for years, but so too would the lesson: in a world quick to condemn, truth must be shouted louder than lies, or risk being buried forever. Months had passed since the storm began, yet the company still walked a fragile line between recovery and collapse. Though the worst of the review bombing had slowed, its aftershocks continued to echo through every corner of the business. Online searches still pulled up old articles and screenshots tying their name to the US Open scandal. And even when new customers discovered the truth, doubt lingered. Once reputation is stained, even clarity feels uncertain. For the owner and employees, the question was no longer just about saving sales. It was about reclaiming their very identity. The office, which once buzzed with the rhythm of regular business, now resembled a war room. Whiteboards filled with strategy notes lined the walls. Every morning began with a tense meeting where the team analyzed the latest reviews, tracked social media mentions, and debated which fire to put out first. Exhaustion showed on their faces, but beneath it burned a shared determination. They were fighting not just for income, but for dignity, for recognition that they were more than a name caught in the crossfire of digital rage. The company's crisis consultant pushed for more aggressive storytelling. People forget fast, he explained, but they also move on fast. If you can give them a new story to attach to your name, something positive, human, inspiring, you can shift the narrative. Taking this advice, the company launched a campaign unlike anything they had attempted before. Instead of focusing on the scandal, They leaned into community service. They began organizing food drives, sponsoring local school programs, and offering free products to frontline workers. Every act was documented, shared online, and accompanied by a reminder of who they really were: a small business that cared about people, not a viral villain from a sporting event. Slowly, this strategy began working. Local news outlets that once reported the controversy now returned to cover these initiatives, presenting the company in a new light. Customers who had abandoned them cautiously came back, curious about whether the business had truly survived. For many, seeing the faces of employees smiling as they handed out donations replaced the old image of angry reviews and accusations. While the damage wasn't erased, new memories were being layered over the old ones, softening the edges of the company's tarnished reputation. But the internet is a place that rarely forgives completely. Every time progress was made, a new wave of trolls seemed to rise, dragging the scandal back into conversation. Some mocked their community work as a desperate ploy. Others continued to spam reviews with sarcastic one-star ratings, keeping the business's online profile scarred. The staff felt as though they were climbing uphill with weights strapped to their backs, making progress but never escaping the shadow. It was in these moments of frustration that the owner began to wonder if survival was enough. Did they want to merely patch their image, or did they want to fight for something bigger? Justice for all businesses who suffered this same fate. That thought grew louder when the company was invited to a national conference on digital ethics and online accountability. The owner was hesitant at first, fearing more public exposure might backfire. But after some reflection, he accepted. When he walked onto the stage and shared the story of how his company had been destroyed by mistaken identity, the audience listened in stunned silence. He spoke about the tears of his employees, the harassment they faced, and the endless uphill battle of clearing their name. He ended with a message that resonated deeply. If it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. We must demand better protections. That speech spread far beyond the conference. Clips of it circulated online, not as mockery, but as inspiration. Suddenly, the company's name was linked not only to scandal, but also to resilience and advocacy. They became a symbol of resistance against online mob justice. Their story carried across blogs, podcasts, and even television segments. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. They were no longer silent victims. They were survivors telling the world that digital cruelty had real-world costs. Inside the company, morale began to shift. Employees who had once been broken by harassment now felt pride again, knowing they had endured the worst and transformed pain into purpose. Customers who once hesitated began actively supporting them, leaving long, heartfelt reviews about how the business had been wronged and why it deserved a second chance. While financial recovery was slow emotionally, the company stood taller than it had in months. Still, the battle was not over. The scars of the scandal would likely never fade completely. There would always be remnants online, old memes, screenshots, and articles linking their name to the infamous US Open incident. But now, they had something stronger than silence. They had a voice, a story, and a growing movement on their side. The ordeal had transformed them, not only as a business but as individuals. They had seen the worst of what the internet could unleash, and they had survived. The question that lingered now was not whether they could endure, but what they would choose to do next with the platform fate had handed them. By the time a full year had passed since the US Open incident, the company had transformed into something far beyond its original purpose. What had begun as a small family-owned business with a modest reputation had evolved into both a survivor and an advocate, a name no longer defined solely by scandal but by the fight that followed it. Yet the journey to this point was marked with both triumphs and deep scars, reminders of how fragile trust can be in the digital era. The day-to-day operations had steadied. Loyal customers returned, and new ones arrived, curious about the story they had read in articles or seen in conference clips. Sales had not yet fully recovered to pre-scandal levels, but the business no longer teetered on the edge of collapse. The owner, once weighed down by despair, now carried himself differently. Still tired, but with a fire in his voice. Employees felt it too. Where once there was dread each morning, now there was a cautious sense of pride. They were still here. They had endured what should have destroyed them. But the true legacy of their ordeal was not financial. It was the message they carried. The company had become a central figure in ongoing debates about online accountability. Universities invited the owner to speak to students about media literacy and the dangers of mob mentality. Advocacy groups cited the company's experience as a case study in how unchecked digital platforms could ruin innocent lives. Their story appeared in reports urging tech companies to implement stronger safeguards against mistaken identity and review bombing. What had once been humiliation was now evidence, a weapon to demand change. Despite this growing recognition, the wounds never fully disappeared. Even after dozens of interviews and clarifications, there were still strangers who stumbled across old reviews and assumed the worst. Every so often, a customer would ask nervously if the company had been, that one, involved in the US Open chaos. Each time, employees calmly explained the truth, but the sting of those questions lingered. No matter how loud the truth was spoken, lies left echoes. The company learned to live with them, not as chains, but as reminders of what they had survived. The most powerful moment came when the owner was invited to testify before a small legislative panel considering reforms for online review platforms. Sitting in that chamber, he spoke not as a polished politician or a professional lobbyist, but as a man who had watched his life's work nearly crumble because of careless assumptions and broken systems. His voice trembled as he described the nights spent reading cruel comments, the tears of his staff, and the endless calls from strangers who thought harassment was entertainment. Lawmakers listened, and though change would be slow, his testimony carried weight. It was no longer just about saving one company. It was about preventing others from enduring the same nightmare. Inside the community, the business's story had taken on almost legendary status. People would mention it as a reminder of how dangerous misinformation could be. Parents told their children the cautionary tale of how quickly lies could spread online.